Welcome to Talent Without Pretense. I'm Gerald Gordon, co-founder of Reference Me, and I am so excited about our new podcast. I spent years watching companies make very expensive, very preventable mistakes around how they hire and how they let people go. This show is where I sit down with HR leaders, CHROs, people executives, founders who are actually in the room when those decisions get made. No buzzwords, no vendor pitches, just honest conversation about what's working, what's broken, and what needs to be fixed and needs to be changed. So let's get into it. Treice Stephenson Wright, you've spent over 2 decades shaping how companies think about total rewards, talent strategy, org design, and the real cost of keeping, growing, and losing people. And you've recently launched TSW Advisory Partners as its founding and managing partner after your own experiences. By this time, what I would like to do is just give you an opportunity to share a little bit about who you are, how you came to be, and of course, more about TSW. So without further ado, everybody, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Treice.
Thank you, Gerald. And right you are. I've recently launched our consulting firm, TSW Advisory Partners. This is following, as you so eloquently put it, several decades of experience within the world of organizational transformation, operations, people and culture and total rewards, having several executive roles, working with various boards and CEOs and chief financial officers. It was time to really create a focal point for this type of work where I could help more organizations. And so my experience expands small startup organizations to Fortune 500 companies. I've had the likes of Alma, Explore Technologies, GE to Accenture. So I have a wide array of experience in these fields and quite a bit to share.
Well, thank you. We're just really glad to have you on. And Talent Without Pretense was designed to take off the virtual background. Our desire is to really get the real behind the real. And so you and I have been probably watching the headlines of many companies laying tons of people off. And then they turn around with that one sentence and say, we're going to invest more in AI. So what's really happening? Are people losing their jobs just because of AI? Or is there something else going on behind the scenes?
So, Gerald, I actually think that there's maybe a better question to ask. And it's not will people lose their jobs because of AI, but it's more of what kind of organizations will exist because of AI. So I think every major technological revolution has caused this level of disruption, right? It's changed the demand for the types of jobs that exist. The difference that we're experiencing right now is where in the past, these sort of transitions, people have had decades to adjust to them. This generation maybe only has a few years, so it's happening more rapidly. And transitions are messy, and that's what we're in right now. We're in a state of transition.
I really love how you frame that because when we do think about it, we're so used to having a longer timeline in
Mhm.
order to actually adjust and make changes, but the changes eventually do show up.
That's
But when
right.
we think about AI, not only is it an organizational change and a technological change, but our ability to adapt has to change as well because we don't have a long period of time in order to get an understanding of AI. Either you start understanding how to use it now, or just in a couple of years, as you mentioned, you will become obsolete. And I do think that's interesting. There was an article on LinkedIn, Rob Rolfe, I think, mentioned this. He said, our students who are coming out of school,
Hmm.
and what they're finding is that the ladder that they used to have to learn different skills and then actually start being productive in the workplace has changed drastically. He put it this way, that the ladder is not complete anymore, that employers want you to start almost at a mid-level and a senior level because of what AI has done. And we're losing that foundational structure of being able to grow people into the role now that AI is there, it's almost like you got to learn on your own and you got to come in already producing. I'm curious from that perspective. And when we think of AI, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. So when we think about AI right now, I think that we are in what I could very simplistically call the first wave of AI, which is AI is eliminating tasks. I think that the next wave of this and what we're starting to see symptoms of is AI eliminating organizational layers. And I think that that's what people are feeling like literally put into words. Where the conversation is headed is when we think about middle management, when we think about coordinators, when we think about reporting layers, when we think about administrative overhead and functional silos, those things are going to gradually be diminished, right? And it's not because there's some executives at the top saying, we just want to get rid of these. It's because that AI is really fundamentally changing the very fabric of organizational design. And so when you say that people are coming into organizations and you're not really seeing those, what we would consider entry level roles anymore, that's very real. And let's be clear and validate, where people are coming from when they're saying, I feel like AI is taking my job. But what's really happening is AI is changing, right? The DNA of an organization, how we move and the type of work that we value. That's what they're actually feeling.
I love that. I love the premise of we are entering a space in which everything is compressed and it's actually affecting the organization in general, right? Where we may have whole departments that they consider task departments are no longer needed because AI is making that jump. Now, another thing that I've also noticed is the agentic AI,
Agentic,
right?
yes.
So now we're moving into another area in which we're not just talking about only tasks that are getting done, we're talking about entire workflows that can get done. And so I've seen everything from people being able to do their go to market using agentic AI, where it does the emails, it does the copy, it does the outreach, it responds to outreaches, it creates new information on the fly. But there is something still missing if you allow the agentic system to do all of it without human intervention. I'd love
Yeah.
for you to discuss a little bit about how do you see us as workers working alongside these AI systems in order to produce? And I'm sure you're seeing that also in your practice where your clients are probably asking, how do I integrate AI into my existing process?
So I think there's a few things going on here, right? There is how do we use AI as individuals or as employees? But there's also the organizational piece with how do we bring our employees along for that? And so I often use the analogy an otter with a rock, right? We need to be the otters with the rock. We need to be the otters with AI using that as a tool. So all of the things that you just mentioned with agentic AI, they are tasks, right? Sending an email is a task. Responding to an email is a task. Posting on social media is a task. And that's what I mean about this first wave of AI really replacing tasks. So I think that what becomes increasingly important is how we as users maximize the way that we use that AI as a tool and how we can then create more of the value proposition from a human perspective. And it's really interesting because I think that the narrative right now, a very popular narrative, really is that AI replacing humans. But I think what's actually happening is AI is revealing where human value is more important. And that's what we're seeing. So, for example, when we look at recruiting, a lot of companies really leaned in very quickly into we're going to have AI do all of our screening and, all of the applications. We're going to use ATS. We're going to do all of the things. And what they found, and this is me, someone being on the inside and dealing with the talent attraction function, the candidates that you get from that, they're using AI too, right?
Absolutely.
And so now you have to deal with, are you interviewing a real person? Are they using type of AI that allows them to mask themselves? Like, you need the human element. And what AI is doing is it's revealing the gaps where the human value is absolutely necessary.
100% agree with that sentiment. I was also thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about how often do we come across and how do we feel when we know that AI is actually interacting with us? I'll give a good example of this. I was just reached out to recently for a CTO role, right? I'm not interested in looking for a new role at this moment, but my background is in technology. And as I was responding back to the person, I said, well, let's have a meeting to discuss this. And it wrote back and said, well, I don't really want to have a meeting, but I'll send you the information so that you can take a look at it. Now, whether it was a real person or not, the first thing that popped up in my mind, this must be an AI system that's trying to court me into looking at their particular application, but it may not be a real person behind it. Now, I could be wrong. And of course, I don't want to offend anybody if they see this, but that immediately wanted me to stop interacting with them because I was like, well, if you're not going to give me the courtesy to have a quick meeting to discuss what this position really is, then I'm not sure I trust you with what you're sending me because you could just be an AI system. So this now pulls me into the next question that I have for you. Have you experienced or seen or your thoughts on the fraudulent things that are now happening as a result of AI?
Wow, yeah, so I think, to put it in, I think some of the more generationally relevant terms, it gets a little cringe, right? There are the ways that we've used AI, especially on the people and culture side, that have been extremely beneficial, right? So, for example, I've used AI for learning and development to help sales leadership teams, to practice their pitches and use very relevant metrics and data to the company to help sales team get better, right? Those are great. I've also seen where folks have started to try to use AI for therapy, as an example.
Mm,
And so I think that there's a spectrum, and in some ways where it's being misused, it does feel odd. I think that we as human beings pick up on it and it feels very unnatural to us. And again, that's that human value element, right? But there are some ways that it can be extremely beneficial. Even carrying this back to organizations and how they move and operate. There's always been this sentiment that, your organization is growing or we're getting better and we're basing it on headcount. You started with a 200-person organization and now you're at 5,000, and that means that you're doing bigger and better things. And I think that AI is challenging that mentality. And so being able to use AI to replace some of these tasks and interactions is great, but I think that we do have to be careful about some of these instances that you're referring to where it's bad conduct, right? It's
well,
being used nefariously. Like we do have to be careful of that, but I think that there are just so many great things that we can extract from the capabilities of AI if it's used in the right way.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's called Winter. I'm not sure it's called Winter 1990 or something like that, but this wave of machine learning, I'm going to use machine learning terms, has been around since 1960s, 1970s. And it was around those times where it was just playing chess or playing Jeopardy or things of this nature where you saw the value of generative language or generative AI. They were calling it machine learning back then. And at some point, people stopped investing in it and it became quite kind of like a winter. And we also realized that the technology wasn't fast enough in order to actually make these systems useful in any measure of the imagination. Imagine typing a prompt and then waiting 10 minutes for a response. So we realized back then that this wasn't ready yet, but they knew that it was probable to be something that everyone would use. So now we fast forward 30, almost 50 years, right? Since the time where they were able to use systems to make it act like it was thinking by using data to where we are now. Now the systems are faster. Now they're able to actually respond. And at the end of the day, they're using data that already existed. So the way that I want to preface this question is if the AI system is using data that already existed, which is very different than how humans process things, we're able to take data that already existed and extrapolate from what's happening in front of us to help us make decisions on what the future looks like. The system doesn't have that human piece. It's unable to do that because it's only using the historical data factors. So I'm just curious, when we think of the AI system today and its ability to extrapolate what we expect to get in the future, do you have any thoughts on how it does miss the mark? And what can we do to actually use AI in a way that gets us 85% there? I don't believe that we'll ever get 100% there, but 85% there may be enough. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, if we think about a system that's using stale data to try to extrapolate something in the future, but misses the middle part because it cannot perceive information like humans can perceive information and make decisions right then and there, mixing with our personal experience as well. So I know I said a lot, but at the end of the day, what do you see as a barrier for organizations when they think of using AI?
So I think this first of all, very interesting points. And there's several ways to answer that. Firstly, as far as AI being able to only respond to historical data, I think that we have to question the extent of historical, right? The refresh of data these days is pretty instantaneous when we're talking about social media and news outlets, like things are happening very real time and they're all happening online, right? And so, what we perceive as this is what's happening right now, AI has access to what's happening right now, right? To an extent, not, obviously, like I can see the car crossing the street right now, obviously, you know what I mean? Like to an extent. And that's when we get back to how we as humans use AI as a tool, not as the end all be all of information and how to achieve things. And I think that where organizations may be sometimes missing is there's all of this work that's happening in the background, sometimes at the executive level, sometimes within HR, that is looking at how our organizations need to perform in this age of AI development. And there's almost the work behind the scenes, and the employees aren't brought along for that journey. So, what
Yeah.
happens is there's this big event. There are reductions in force, or, a company is having a major transformational change. And that is the first time that employees are being read in on this big thing, right? This big event. Where I would shift and where I counsel the organizations that I work with is really bringing employees along for that journey and making them a part of that journey. So, yes, AI will replace some jobs and tasks, but how are you bringing your employees along for how they can now add value? So, a really good example is some of my work has really involved systems and technology, right? How do we optimize our systems? How do we use AI to make them talk to each other better so that we can automate certain tasks? No one should be sending manual emails for onboarding and offboarding, for example, right? So how do we get our systems to do these things when we're doing performance management, right? How do we have everything that we need to see in one place to make a really solid decision on our top performers? How do we look at their, not just this year's performance ratings, but the past few years? How do we look at whatever learning and development they've taken, all of their certifications? How do we look at how they're evangelizing the organization outside of the organization, right? Where do we see all this in one place? How do we see how they've grown in their earnings all in one place so that we can know where we have talent risks and where we really need to beef up our retention mechanisms?
Hmm.
If
I,
you're working 10 years ago, there are distinct different departments doing this work, right? You have your
yeah.
talent attraction team doing one piece, you have your performance management team doing one piece, you have a compensation team doing one piece, you have a benefits team doing one piece, right? And so now you have technology that will let you look at this more holistically. So how do all of these departments then add value? That's where
Hmm.
the innovation comes from an organizational development standpoint. And that's where I feel like the gap is for many leaders, right? We're focused on, yes, we've eliminated these tasks, but we're not focused on the then now what? Because the reality is that these employees have a very unique and distinct skill set outside of AI where they could add a higher level of value, and we're not tapping into that yet. That's where I think the gap is.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. The way that a mentor has said this to me, he's like, are you solving a big enough problem?
Hmm.
Because the big enough problem will actually stretch you to be able to think holistically through your experience and the domain expertise that you have. And that usually is what resonates with people. So if I was I am business owner. So as a business owner, my job is to actually solve bigger problems. The smaller problems will eventually get solved, which also brings me back to what happens in a lot of organizations with AI. They've already had operational inefficiencies that were causing an impact in the business. And now with AI, they're just kind of fixing those things that were already an issue. However, it will come a time where you've done enough automation and you still need to get new customers, right? You still need to figure out a way to actually drive the business forward. So part of me feels like we're in this space where everybody is just automating what they already have or having AI do the things that they didn't want to do in the first place. But at some point, we got to make this turn where now what does AI give us after we've spent all this money for all of these tools? And we've implemented it in the organization and everybody is great automating the things they don't want to do. But at some point, this needs to make money or it needs to help drive business. And most of the reports will say we're seeing efficiency within the company and modifying the tasks that were already broken, but they're not seeing very much change when it comes to either getting more market share, finding better employees, or even going into new markets. Do you see that happening, or is there a different perspective when we think about, hey, we automated everything, now what?
I've seen this a number of different ways. And it's so interesting that you mentioned like we've automated everything. Now what? One of the things I can say about AI is that in many instances it can be a very efficient truth teller, right? And just taking what you're doing and automating it is not a solution, right? If your processes are inefficient or if your customer support is not working, right? And you just go ahead and automate it, you've automated inefficiency.
Mm,
You're not going to grow, right? You're not going to do better. And you may spiral into whatever abyss you were already going toward,
mm,
but now you've automated it. And so you get to get there faster, right? And so, there is still this very heavy reliance on people intelligence, right? I think that what the nature of the market is doing right now, it's really revealing that people value. And so I think that organizations are, whereas before they're looking for like, do you have a degree in X, Y, or Z? And if you have that, that means that you're capable in this role, right? That's not going to be the measure anymore, right? They're going to be specifically looking for people who can solve problems across functions, right? So you've gone into finance and you know how to do finance. Well, we need you to know how to do finance from an IT lens, right? You've gone to school for HR and organizational development, but now we need you to train the staff on AI. We
mm,
need you to develop these leaders for the next stage of the organization in AI. So I think that what's happening right now is it's forcing people to not be so narrowly scoped in what they consider their expertise anymore, right?
mm,
Organizations are going to be looking for people who can shift cross functionally, who can think strategically, who understand AI and how to use it, how to deploy it in the best interest of the organization. They're going to look for people who can truly exercise data backed judgment in ways that AI can't, right?
yeah.
And so if, I'm using AI for my recruiting in any capacity, who's going to be there to say, this is where we draw the line in who we hire versus AI said that this is the person. So this is the person. You hire this person. It's not what you thought you were getting. Now you have to replace them. How much money are you bleeding, right? Through resources from having to correct a mistake from AI where you didn't have what I've heard referred to as a human in the loop, right?
Love
And so, people who can communicate. AI is great, but it can't communicate like people can communicate. You can still see the nuances in that, right? We're not quite at the stage where, you have AI walking around and you can't tell the difference between that and a human. We're not there yet. The way that we communicate and the nuances within that are still important. And it's a very uniquely human capability. And then also people who can lead change. This
it.
comfort that we've been sitting in for decades on decades. The people who are not comfortable with the disruption that's happening right now will not make it. They just won't.
Mm,
And
mm.
so people who can not only survive the change, but lead the change, that's what organizations are going to be looking for right now. And that's what they will truly need.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to plus 1,000 on that. We always use the term judgment, and it was always something that was really hard to pin down, especially in the executive roles. They're like, we want this person to have good judgment, but it was hard to actually determine specifically what that looks like. I think now with AI, we can determine that after a number of things have happened, we can look back and say, okay, how was your judgment in any of these areas? And judgment is not something that we expect to get from AI. It is a uniquely human trait to be able to look at the things that the information that they have, mix it with their personal experiences, and then actually make a decision is to me what we call judgment. And that decision, whether it's good or bad, to be honest, you can't tell at the moment. It's only after the decision has been made and the results of the decision that can tell you whether the decision was good or bad. So it is interesting that you bring up what's happening in the recruiting space right now and
Yeah.
the ability to actually find the right person, which isn't an innately human trait. One of the areas of Reference Me, which is sponsoring this podcast, our business, we saw a gap where everybody is technically has an AI resume. So they're all going to use AI to build their resumes, right? But those AI systems will start, those resumes will start looking the same. So if you look at 10 people that, or you look at 100 people that apply for a specific role, you'll probably find out that 80% of them were using AI. And on top of that, the context looks exactly the same. And that makes it very difficult because no matter what ATS system you have, if it eliminates everybody that actually applied, it's not doing its job. And if it's not finding the people within the job applications that they're submitting, it's still not doing its job. So at Reference Me, what we decided to do was use the human element. So we expect our executives to have 5 to 7 references. And these references come about before they even get to the job application. It's a reference that you get to keep with you so that you can use it over and over again. But the secret sauce within there is that we have humans validating the reference. So we provide a way to do video, audio, and AI to collect the information. And then we have a mini interview with the person who wrote the reference because we need to know that they're human. We need to know that their background actually matches what they are actually writing about. We need to know that it wasn't your cousin or your uncle who actually just helped you out and gave you a reference, but doesn't have the expertise. And so at Reference Me, we do it a little bit differently. We want you to come to the table with the references already in hand that actually talk about what you've achieved. And then we use it as a filter. So if you apply for a VP role, it'll literally say, in order to apply for this role, you have to have 4 or 5 references that are certified by us. And that's how we help organizations. So I want to jump back into something you said that if you make the mistake and hire the wrong person, and all of a sudden now you have to go through that process again because the offboarding, the this person didn't work out, all of these things, especially when it's a contract role. Have you seen that cause a tremendous amount of upheaval to get headcount again, to get back into the budget again, and all of this stuff? And I'm just curious, have you had that experience? And what was that like for the organization?
So this is another instance where I've seen this handled a couple of different ways. So I've seen some organizations, especially at some of the more senior roles, take the approach that I'll call is cheaper to keep her, right? When you get into these leadership roles, the cost of just the recruiting piece is expensive, right? Then you get the person in the job. At these leadership roles, you probably did a sign on bonus, right? You are paying for benefits. You are paying for their development costs. Let's say even in the most extreme cases, there's a relocation cost, right? You've expended a great deal of resources to get this person in the door. They come in and it's a flop. Well,
Mm,
if they're, you know, savvy and they've been scamming for a long time, right? This is, their thing. Then they probably are familiar with employment laws. They've probably, got you wrapped up in some sort of potential litigation for letting them go, right? And this is very honestly behind the curtains what I've seen. I have seen people come into leadership roles, scam their ways into roles, right? Very well, very well. Great resumes, great backgrounds, but even more importantly, great networks. And they've gotten into these positions and they've been completely incompetent. And again, we're talking about leadership level.
Yeah.
So what do? Right? If a lot of times these are very public too, right? This person has announced on LinkedIn, you've done a press release, like it's problematic. And so when I say some organizations just take the it's cheaper to keep her route, it's like, okay, we need to figure it out, but we really can't afford to pivot, right?
Mm,
There's just too much at stake to pivot with this role. So that's one way that I've seen, and it has been extremely detrimental. So what do they do around that? They may either hire more people around this person
mm,
to get the work done, or then they may exhaust certain folks who are already in the organization to wear multiple hats now because this particular position isn't performing the way that it needs to. And let me be clear, these are the ways that I've seen this mishandled, right? This is not the way to handle it, but this is what I've seen. In other situations, it's, well, this isn't a good fit. Let's do a mutual exit. Well, it's a mutual exit, so you owe me severance.
yeah.
So, it's still expensive, right? And then you have to pay to go back to market to get another person from where, and if there's someone good, you're taking them from someone else. So perhaps you have to pay them out of their equity. Perhaps you have to do another signing bonus, right? Whatever that is, it's costly. You may still be paying the person that you just exited. You're probably paying their Cobra. You're probably
Mhm.
paying that. Like, it gets expensive. And so these are mistakes that some organizations just can't afford to tolerate in this economy right now, especially when we're looking at companies that are just getting started, right? That are Series B, C, right? You can't afford these types of mistakes, which means that you can't rely solely on AI to fill these mission critical roles. You have to have that human element in the loop, right? And it's almost ironic, right? It's almost like AI is making human skills more valuable.
Absolutely. I love that. And you're saying what a lot of us are. It's almost like it hasn't come to a reckoning yet where we actually have to take that pause and say, I think the government, not that I'm giving credit to the government, but the government actually said, you see these new models that are coming out, you're no longer going to just be able to push them out without them going through some governmental review. Right? They've already taken a stand because some of these models can actually be detrimental to our security.
Yep.
And so now they're like, sorry, you got to go through review. Now, at the end of the day, what it really means, I'm not trying to get into the political stuff, but what I am saying is someone is looking and realizing that this is detrimental, so we need to do something. So thank you for sharing some of the behind the scenes information, especially when it relates to how delicate these situations are when it comes to hiring new talent. But I want to shift gears to one more question that I think is really important for us to at least join into this conversation. We talked about AI. We talked about what happens if you hire the wrong person. We talked about organizational change. Now, one last thing that I'm starting to see a lot of is when thousands and thousands of people are being laid off, they're getting a video like from Mark Zuckerberg that's just like, sorry, your role is no longer needed. But some of the individuals that were being let go were the ones who helped build the company. They actually were people who were of stature, of value, and did a lot of different things to help the company. What does the company owe them when they decide they're going to actually lay off these departments and it wasn't the fault of performance? Do you
Mhm.
think that there's a responsibility of the company to ensure that those people are treated fairly on the offboarding side?
That that's I would consider that a hot button topic because it is very much one where I sit in a position where I can see several different perspectives. And so and these are conversations that I've had to have with leaders and mentees alike, right? When you think about a business, you really define that. And so this is me speaking to people who are employed under entities, right? You're employed under a business. a business's job is to make money. That's their foremost responsibility, is to make money, survival of the business. And so one of the things that I find pretty heart-wrenching is that, and even in the examples that you're giving, is historically people in general have felt a certain type of loyalty to these organizations that they're finding now is not reciprocated. And let's be very clear, it is not fair, right? The playing field is not level. The organizations have way more power over individuals' livelihood than would be considered fair. At the same time, there has to be a realization that this is a business. And so where people have generationally thought about job security,
Yeah.
that's not a thing.
Mm,
Never has been, right? And so this is what I mean where AI is like the ultimate truth teller. You never had job security. The person who's sitting at the helm, the Zuckerbergs or whomever, right? They have always had control over whether you are employed or not.
very true.
And so it's just now that's becoming a realization. And quite frankly, I think that some organizations are being very irresponsible in the way that they handle that, because these are still people and you are disrupting livelihood. And the way that you manage that, like, sure, there is a reality that certain tasks don't exist, which means certain skills are not needed, which means certain roles are no longer needed. It's logical. It is. But there is a way to handle that from a human perspective that some companies are missing. And they are receiving the backlash for that, as they should, right? Because while you're growing as a business and you are, you know, you're doing what you need to do as a business, right? This is the reality.
Yep.
Business make money. You don't pay for things that you don't need to pay for, right? You just don't do that. But the way that you manage people, you can't lose that element. And I think that some companies are just missing the mark on that, and people are feeling that, right? And so, you know, I don't find that many organizations in the long run continue to be very successful when they treat people in that manner. There's usually some form of reckoning in that, but it is unfortunate that they have that level of power and that they misuse it occasionally when it comes to the people. But here's the piece that I want to drive home is that, for employees, you do have to understand that you're working for a business. It doesn't matter if you help get that business off the ground from inception or if you're going to work for a Fortune 500. It is still a business. And so are you. You are a business entity and you have to treat yourself that way. And so there should never be a point where your resume is not up to date. There should never be a point where you're not networking and looking at other roles and other opportunities. There should not be any moment in time where you're not chasing multiple streams of income, right? You are a business too, and you must move accordingly, especially in the state of the market right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those who we call them portfolio careers, the ability to actually package what they do well and then use that as a way to talk to multiple businesses so that they can actually generate more income, 100% agree. And those who didn't take the time to build their networks and build something that I always say you got to give into the community in order to get from the community, and they haven't given anything into the community, but yet they expect to get something out of it, they are struggling right now in a major way. Wow, Treese, what an incredible conversation. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for actually speaking to us about what it looks like from the inside lens. And in addition to that, I know that TSW is going to be wildly successful if it's not already. And so I want to at least give you some time to talk about specifically what you do and what would you like our readers to know about your particular business. And then we'll kind of end the show there.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So TSW Advisory Partners is a boutique. I wouldn't call it consulting, but I really don't want us to be lumped in with what consulting firms do. And so just for context, your traditional consulting firm, they come in, they hear what issues you have going on. They pull a toolbox from a shelf of tools that they've used from other organizations. They may tweak it a little bit and they give it to you and say, here, this is your solution. And then they're out, right? They are very functionally scoped. So if you say, I have a finance issue, they'll give you a finance tool. If you say, I have an IT issue, they'll give you an IT tool, and so on. Where TSW is very different is that we operate first and foremost cross functionally, and it is very white glove. And so we're not coming in to give you a toolbox or kit from something that we've used on a different client. We're actually coming in to hear what's going on with you and not only diagnose that from a functional perspective, but really connect the dots cross organizationally for you. And unlike traditional consultants, we're not just going to throw something at you. We're sticking around for the implementation and execution, right?
Mhm.
And we also have the flexibility where, some startups, they don't have the budget to bring in a chief operating officer or a chief people officer, right? But they might still need the brain trust from that expertise. So we have executive office hours as one of our offerings where you need to just use a sounding board for an hour just to get the ideas flowing. What is it that we can do in the immediate to solve whatever bottlenecks that we have firsthand? You don't have to commit to, a consulting contract. You don't have to commit to an additional FTE. You don't have to bring in a fractional chief, whatever, right? You can still get the information and resources that you need at the level that you deem necessary as an organization. So I think that flexibility is what sets us apart. And again, that very white glove, customized service that we offer our clients.
Fantastic. And I absolutely love that. I love the sticking around and not just implementing something and leaving. I think that that is a critical differentiator for what your company does. In addition to that, everyone, if you want to reach out to Treice, her information will be in the show notes and you can also find her on LinkedIn. So, and if you're interested in Reference Me, in which we're a premier white glove service for companies who have just did a riff or interested in doing a riff, and we help you treat those employees with dignity and respect. You can find us at referenceme.ai. And Therese, do you have a site or anything that people can go to if they wanted to find more information about you?
Absolutely. So, Gerald, as you mentioned, you can find me on LinkedIn, Treice Stephenson Wright. You can find our firm at tswadvisory.com. And you can email us at info@tswadvisory.com.
All right, fantastic. All right, so we are signing off. Thank you all for your time and energy, and we are sure that you got something from this podcast. This is Talent Without Pretense.